Okay, on to the reason you all are here, and I think we've got a great program. I'm going to introduce both our moderator and our guest, tell you a little bit about them. First of all, Melissa Fruget. Melissa, she's currently the Chief Legal Officer at Spreadfast. Before that, she had a similar role, including General Counsel, Secretary, and Senior Vice President of HomeAway. And you can't be in Austin and not know about HomeAway and the success of that company, going from privately backed through IPO and then ultimately through its purchase about a year and a half ago. She was right in the middle of all of that. Tremendous amount of experience working for DLA Piper. The only thing that probably is, one of the things she doesn't want us to talk about, or maybe she does, is that she's also a Trojan from the University of Southern California. So just look at the scoreboard. It doesn't matter what the spread was, right? So Melissa, thank you very much for moderating the program. And then our special guest who's come down from Dallas is Theo Killion. Theo was the CEO of Zale Corporation from September 2010 till he retired in the middle of July 2014, and he led a major corporate turnaround. And the reason we have him here today is to talk about that experience. He also has just a deep history in leadership positions in corporations. He has done a number of different jobs in the different companies that he's worked for. He's extremely active in NACD, both locally within his chapter and at the national level, and I'm looking forward to seeing him again next week. And we're just blessed to have him and his experience and him taking a day of his life to come down here and spend time with us. So welcome, Theo. Look forward to hearing what you all have to say. So with that, I will turn the program over to our moderator and our guest. Thank you.
All right, Theo, let's jump in. So with your experience at Zales, particularly in light of your successful initiatives to turn around the company, you no doubt have some great lessons and insight for our audience. So would you mind setting the stage by giving us an overview of your tenure there?
Sure, happy to. First of all, let me say it's a privilege and a pleasure to be in Austin. This is one of my favorite United States cities by far. Haven't had enough time to spend here, but I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another event. And I just love coming down here, and every time I come, I discover something that's new and interesting and fun. So thank you for having the meeting, and thank you for having the meeting in Austin. As Rick alluded, I am a huge cheerleader for NACD. I believe that to be a director on a public board or on a nonprofit board, you have to be a continuous learner, and you have to push yourself in situations where you understand what the issues are. And NACD does a wonderful job of presenting a number of issues for all of us so that we can continue to stretch our minds horizontally to be able to be greater contributors to our organizations and to our boards. The Zale story is interesting, and I'm going to take a little bit of liberty here. M.B. Zale was a Russian-Jewish immigrant who came to the United States and opened a little jewelry store in Wichita Falls, Texas in 1924. And he did it at a time when he believed that there were three critical things to running a jewelry business: great product, great people, and having accessible credit. Three things, by the way, that are still critically important to running a great jewelry business. And what MB did was he was able to take an emerging middle class, he was able to present affordable jewelry, $1 down and 10 cents a week to get you into that diamond that you've wanted your whole life, and started a business that is now 93 years old. It celebrated its 90th anniversary while I was still there as CEO. And not unlike a lot of businesses, over a period of time, as he transitioned out as the founder of the business, his son took over the business. It became a public company. And then when Donald retired, it went through a succession of leadership changes. From 19, for the 10 years prior to my being named CEO, there were 6 CEOs, there were 5 CFOs, and I was the 7th CEO. 10 years, 7 CEOs. You know, that even breaks a national average. Most CEOs are in their job about 4 years, 3.5, 4 years. This was barely a year and a half. And the board couldn't figure out what was wrong. So when I was offered the job, and I say that, again, taking some liberty, the person who I worked for, who recruited me to Zale, was someone who is a dear friend of mine, with whom I've spent 25 years in friendship. We'd worked together a few times before. He came down as CEO of Zale with great expectations of running a business that was going to be a successful business, even though so many other people failed. And it didn't work. So after 2 years, he was fired. In January of 2010, I had been there for 2 years prior to that. The chairman of the board came into my office the day after he fired my friend, and he said, "Theo, the board wants you to be interim CEO." We had lost money for 2 years. The business wasn't profitable. We had had negative comp store sales, which is the benchmark everybody uses every quarter to think about retail stores, for 2 years in a row, negative 22% comps the December before Neil got fired. We were losing $118 million in EBITDA. And the chairman of the board comes in and says, "We want you to be interim CEO." So I'm thinking to myself, what's the other option? How many people are lined up for this thing? And the answer was there were no other options. There weren't any other people lined up for it. And I said to him, you know, let me call my wife. Let me talk to her and think this thing over. So I called her up at night and I said, "Guess what? I've been asked to be interim CEO. By the way, CEO is never a job I ever wanted in my life, and I don't want it again. Different story for a different conversation. But it was never a job I ever wanted." And she said, "Well, what are you thinking?" I said, "I don't think there's anybody else to do it. We've taken $150 million of SG&A out of the business. The place is in severe disrepair. I don't know if we're going to be able to make it. We have about 6 months before we're going to run out of business, out of money. Our credit card deals are expiring. It's not good." She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "You know, I think I might do it. I don't know if there's any other alternatives." So I came into my office the next day, and somebody gave me a Dallas Morning News that announced me as the interim CEO of Zale. I said yes. And what started in January 2010, during the first 2 months, was an incredibly deep excavation for me and for 2 of the people with whom I had the pleasure of working: my head of marketing, my head of merchandising, and my CFO. And what we did was we looked at the business from 10 years to 2010. So the prior 10 years forward, what was good, what was bad, when it worked, what was true, when it didn't work, what was true, what of those things can we take and apply to the future, and how can we then take that and make it into a strategy. And the board said, "We want to see your strategy in a month." Right? So we worked every day from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. and we crafted a strategy. And at the same time, we had 21 meetings with 21 hedge funds and private equity folks to try to get an equity infusion, to try to give us a lifeline to execute this strategy if, in fact, this strategy was going to work. And we presented the strategy on February 17th, 2010, about a month and a couple of days after I'd been named interim CEO. It was a 157-page document. And the way that I think about that document, it was 157 pages of telling the board the truth. And part of what happened was, it was like putting a mirror in front of them And I said to my wife the night before, I'm extremely uncomfortable with this job. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, but a lot of the problems that have existed here have been created by the board, and they need to know that. So if I do my job correctly, at the end of that board meeting, they're going to have a tough time sleeping, just like I do every single night. So that was the objective, really simple objective. I want them to be uncomfortable, like I'm uncomfortable. First day ended, and we presented our strategy. First day of the strategy. Quiet at the end of the meeting. It's like, yeah, it's working, it's good, it's good. Second day, we presented this next part of the strategy. They said, that was the most amazing thing we've ever seen. I said, all we did was to look at the history of the business, to unlock the things that were true and the things that weren't true. We're in a business that turns one time a year. So if we do the right things, maybe we can dig ourselves out of this hole. We got a $150 million secured term loan at incredibly expensive terms to give us a lifeline to try to get us to the 1st December, which is the most critical time in a jewelry business. And what we did was we started executing the plan. And from January of 2010 until July of 2014, we executed a multi-layered plan, a great deal of which had to do with those three things that MB Zale talked about. I think it's really important to understand the history of the business that you're in, to go back and understand the DNA that started it. Why was it special when it was special, and to bring that forward and make it relevant for today. So we did that. We did something that isn't done enough, in my view, my opinion, in businesses today, which is that the first day I became CEO, not the first day after the strategy was accepted, I still had an interim CEO title. By the way, I believe that the best title for any of us in any of our jobs is interim. Incredibly clarifying. Incredibly clarifying, right? We're interim on earth. Interim's the greatest title in the world. It focuses your attention on what's important. Like, I'm an interim guy. Okay, I get it. So we started working on executing that plan, and we introduced the plan. And the first part of the plan was, I said to the group, we're going to invert the pyramid. Typical CEO sits up here, customers sit on the bottom, and we're going to put the customers on top. I'm the least important person in the company. The most important person, the people in the company, are the people who shop at our 1,100 stores. The next most important people in our company are the 12,000 people who serve the customer. And we're going to go about over the next several years working on putting in place a company that serves the customer. Serves the customer. One of the interesting things when you listen to Jeff Bezos talk is he does three things that I admire a great deal. One is he talks about his business as being customer obsessed. I like that. Two is he's incredibly good with analytics. And three is he's great with innovation. Three things that are important. So we went about that. And in July of 2010, we had our first positive comp. And in the Christmas quarter of December, January of 2010, we had our first positive quarter. And without taking you through lots of the other drama in the business that took place, because it wasn't a straight line to the finish, we had 14 quarters of positive comps. And among the things, other than inverting the pyramid, that was really important, was elevating the people in the organization so that they understood it was their company, was taking the people who worked in those stores and converting them from being renters to owners of their business, and getting a board that was aligned to the strategy in the same way that we were aligned to the strategy. When I became CEO, we had a board that was populated by a group of people, all very well-meaning people, but these were the people who changed out 6 CEOs in 10 years. These were the people who spent $880 million in stock buybacks, and when I became CEO, the stock was at $1.39. So our investors, $880 million of our investors' money, stock was at $1.39. This was the board. So one of the most critical things was to think about, how do we get to a new board? And the first part of that was thinking about our strategy and whether or not we had a board with the capabilities, the skills, and the abilities to offer advice, counsel, leadership, and truth for the strategy that we were on. Not saying yes to stuff, but simply offering the truth, but having those skills. And for over a period of the first couple of years, the board changed dramatically. I partnered with a person who was a private equity person who came in to the business, who had a retail background and who understood the business. And we worked on the strategy to, over a period of time, transition many of the people on the board and get a group of people who were a lot smarter than me. I think that's great when you're CEO, to have people who are smarter than you, above you and below you, and who help to ask the right questions, push us in the right directions, tell us the truth, and to execute that strategy that I just talked about.
That's great, Theo. And you have done such a great job because you've already answered a couple of my questions. So let me find the next one. So I know one of the first things, in addition to getting a new strategy, was to get this new board in place. And it was really important to get a board who was aligned on strategy and who had the relevant experience. Let's talk about how we can make sure that that board is being effective and impactful. Can you talk a little bit more about what types of characteristics or experience a director should have, and what type of processes a company can put in place to assess that board performance?
Sure. First, let me give yet another caveat, and that is that what I offer to you is a set of opinions. My opinions have been informed by two things over a period of time: a number of facts, sometimes those facts change, and my lifetime of experience. So any of my opinions are available for challenge because you have your opinions too. So these are my opinions, and I offer that as sort of a lead into answering the question. There's an article, a letter that was written by William McNabb on August 31st of this year. William McNabb runs Vanguard. Vanguard manages $500 billion of other people's money, and they invested in public companies. They are a quality investor. They invest for the long term. And he wrote an open letter to directors that I believe every director should read and should really think about if you want to have long-term investors like the people from Vanguard. He talked about four things. He talked about quality boards, not a surprise. He talked about governance, not a surprise. He talked about compensation of the key executives, the NEOs, and named executive officers. Again, not a surprise. And he talked about risk. But as you read through it, he had two things in there that I thought were really interesting, really interesting. One was William McNabb, who has $500 billion of other people's money, believes that it's really important to have women on the board. I think that too. William McNabb thinks that, pretty smart guy, got a lot of people's money. Maybe that's a good thing to do. But the other thing he offered up in the article, in the letter, was it has been proven that having a diverse board helps you make better decisions, and the diverse boards make better decisions than non-diverse boards and have better financial performance over time. That's really interesting. So if I'm thinking about the boards on which I serve, I listen to a guy like William McNabb as one of the things that's important. The other thing he talked about, which I thought was really interesting, was he talked about climate risk. Not condemning anybody who's in any business. His point of view was, if you are in a business that could be subjected to climate risk, think about if your headquarters is in Houston. Think about if your headquarters is in Miami. That's climate risk. You are in a place. What is your risk strategy? How are you thinking about it? Well, the guy who has $500 billion of everybody else's money is thinking about it, and he's going to be judging you, if you have Vanguard among your investors, by those things. I thought that was interesting. And that's recent. The other thing that I think is very, very important for boards is they have to be aligned with the strategy. Strategy, my opinion, is the absolute most important thing that companies can do. It's a 3 to 5 year view of your business. It looks at everything that's relevant. What's your reason to exist? Who are your customers? Who's your competition? What are your best-selling items? Are those things going to mean anything in the future? Where do you see your business going in 3 to 5 years? How big is it going to be? And oh, by the way, do the people who occupy your board today have the skills, qualities, and abilities to deliver against that? And does your organization have the skills, qualities, and abilities to deliver against that? And that becomes part of the way that the board gets evaluated. So if, in fact, again, as those of you who bored yourself by reading the Dallas Morning News article probably saw, that most of my career is in retail. And in the retail business, there's this thing called Amazon and e-commerce and all of those other things that have happened. We were scared of it in Y2K. Now we're embracing it. And kind of what do you do about that? Well, if you don't have somebody on your board who has literacy in electronic commerce in a real deep and meaningful way, then you don't have a very good board. That should be part of, again, my opinion, how you evaluate your board. Are those things relevant for your strategy? What are the 4 or 5 things that are really important for your strategy? And if you don't have them, I think having a outstanding nom and governance chair is one of the most, finance has always been, an audit, really important, still is. But I think nom and gov is critically important. Who are you going to bring on? What are the qualities that you're going to have? How are you going to partner with the business to think about what that looks like and what the business really needs, and how does that lay out against the strategy, is the way I think you do it. And I think because you have a review of strategy generally every year to tweak, you have a review of the people who are sitting on your board every year as well, my opinion.
Perfect. Theo, you have a really interesting framework for the life cycle of a company. Would you be able to explain that for us and tell us where you think a company should focus?
Like many of the things that I may share with you this evening, few of them are my own. I've stolen them from somebody else. In this instance, I'm actually going to give the person credit. About 25 years ago, I don't do it very often, in this instance I will. About 25 years ago, I met a man named Al Vasari. He was a professor at Penn State. And he introduced a group of us to this idea that businesses have life cycles. And that they have different stages of growth over a period of time. And that it's really interesting and helpful for you to think about what stage of growth you're in, and then how that's relevant to how you're thinking about the future. So the first stage he describes is the entrepreneurial stage. A lot of entrepreneurial stages going on, in Austin. And in the entrepreneurial stage, everyone is self-sacrificing. Everyone understands the strategy. Everyone works tirelessly. There's probably 1 or 2 or maybe 3 people initially who have more energy, intellect, and aptitude for the thing that they believe is going to make a difference. And companies go through that entrepreneurial stage. You go from the entrepreneurial stage to the explorer stage, where you've convinced yourself, maybe your family, that this makes sense, and you start looking for investment. Again, characteristics in the explorer stage are an unbridled enthusiasm for the business, tireless work ethic, thinking about what you're doing in ways that you believe has a white space that nobody else has actually touched, and that in that white space, whether it's for profit or non-profit, you're going to be able to do something that's going to change either commercially or in people's lives the way people do things. Explorer stage. Now, if you're fortunate enough in the explorer stage to get people to invest in you, to get people to say, yeah, this is interesting, you move from the explorer stage to the conqueror barbarian stage. This is the holy cow stage. People are investing in us. I think this makes sense. And you're starting to run like crazy to catch up with the success of the concept. I look at something like Untuck It. They appear to have more money than concept, but that's just my point of view. But in that conqueror barbarian stage, you are running like crazy to try to catch up with this idea that other people have bought into. And then you move from that conqueror barbarian stage to the administrative stage. And in the administrative stage, you actually have to put infrastructure underneath the business. You have to have systems, you have to have processes. You have to have, if you're not in the technology business, you have to invest in technology. You have to have the administrative functions in place. You have to have human resources. You have to have legal. You have that administrative stuff helps lift up the business. And at that point, you have a business that hopefully is a very self-sustaining business and it's working. Now what happens in this life cycle of businesses is a lot of businesses move from the administrator stage into the bureaucrat stage. And in the bureaucrat stage, something really interesting happens. They start talking around the table about what they did yesterday. They start talking around the table about, yeah, you know what, somebody comes in who's a new person in the company, yeah, we tried that. 2000, didn't work. We don't do that stuff anymore. And ideas aren't accepted, ideas are rejected. And you start to protect the status quo. And you start to become really comfortable in that bureaucrat stage. Businesses go from the bureaucrat stage into the aristocrat stage. And when you're in the aristocrat stage, and I don't know if there's any other students of history, but there aren't too many aristocracies that last for very long. They are ridiculous, they're in their own heads, they believe their own stuff, nobody can talk to them, and they wind up going into disrepair and dying. That framework has always been an interesting framework for me in the businesses that I've worked in, because I plug the business into where it is. Zale was at the bureaucrat rapidly speeding toward the aristocrat stage and not working. And understanding that was very clarifying. Because one of the things that Al talked about was really good businesses are excellent at cycling between the entrepreneurial stage, the explorer stage with new ideas, the conqueror barbarian stage with innovation testing, and then building underneath the new ideas, systems and processes. Again, I use Jeff Bezos as a wonderful example. He is constantly testing. If you go to Seattle, there is a concept, there is a store, there is a something, probably not a great thing to say here in Whole Foods land, sorry, but he's constantly testing stuff. He's constantly pushing that explorer stage. So the explorer stage, the entrepreneurial stage, is alive and well in that company. And a lot of companies forget about that because the past holds back the future. You start thinking about protecting stuff and not moving with your customers. So I believe that framework is an interesting way to think about companies.
Yep.
And an interesting way to challenge ourselves and our businesses about staying relevant.
And so if you were on the board of a company that was in these last two stages, what would you do as a board member to try to throw that company into the right part of the cycle again?
I think that having people on your board who tell you the truth is critically important. You need at least one. When I was at Zale, there was a man with whom I had gone through two other turnarounds. One where we both got fired, which, by the way, is also a great experience. I don't know that I plan it, but it's helpful. It's really helpful because you probably do more reflection and more introspection than you ever do if things are just ticking along nicely. Getting fired turns out, if your attitude is the right attitude, to be an okay thing. If you reflect, you think, what do I own, what do they own, as opposed to just getting mad at people. So Dave, my friend Dave, who had run a bunch of other companies as a CEO, had done a bunch of other turnarounds, and we had done 2 turnarounds together. One failed, one modestly succeeded. We sold the company. Was running a big, complicated company, and I called him up and I said, will you meet me in a Zale store in Tampa, Florida, right where you live? And let's walk the store together. He came in with me. He said, Theo, these stores are awful. I said, Dave, I know. Thank you for the truth. Please give me another. I felt like it was an Animal House. But that's a person who's telling me the truth. The stores are awful. I knew that. I knew that somewhere along the way, we took a business that is intrinsically emotional. Selling jewelry. And we made it a commodity. And we took it down to the lowest common denominator. We put it on price. The race to the bottom. And we forgot the business that we were in. We were in the elevation business. We're in the love and happiness business. Nobody comes across a jewelry lease line unless they're happy or celebrating something, someone who they love and who they care about in their life. If you understand that, then you start to think about the business. But this is a business that didn't understand that. So Dave, boy, these stores are dirty and ugly and your people aren't engaged. It's terrible. I said, thank you. I said, but I want you to come on the board. He looked at me like I'd lost my head. I said, look, I've done 2 of these for you. You're going to do this for me. He said, if I come on the board, you can't go bankrupt because I don't want that in my reputation. Seriously, I don't want to sell the, well, thank you, Dave. I know it's all about you. So he came up to the board, and he told me the truth. We would go to board meetings in points of transition, and he would call me after the board meeting, and he would say, this is where you screwed up. This is where you need to do better. This is what I think. I didn't listen to everything he said, and he knew I wouldn't, but he gave me his version of the truth, and he had done it before. It's really important, I think, particularly if you're going through a trend. I think it's true in all of those levels of the life cycle of a company, to have people who have gone through that cycle, to have people who understand that experience, to have people who can share with you their wisdom, to help you out along the way. And so I, over a period of time, the board transitioned to very high functioning, very successful people. Everybody on the board, this is a little thing, it's just my thing, may not be everybody's thing. I think people on the board shouldn't need the money. Again, that's just my thing. I think you should do it because you love the business, you care for the customers, and you think it's the right thing to do, not because it gives you, whatever it gives you. If that's the motivation, your motivations aren't pure, and you can't think clearly for the shareholders and for the people who you represent on the board. Just my little point of view. So I think you have to have people who tell you the truth. Okay. And it's hard to do that. It's really hard to do that.
So let's say you get the right directors, and there are people who will tell you that truth that you need to hear. You've been on both sides. You've been on part of management. You've been on the board. How do you think that a board can best work with management, and when should a board give management the room to operate?
I think I have the incredible privilege of having 2 frames of reference in answering that question. One is, I've been on the other side of the table. And whenever I come into a board meeting, I never ever forget what it was like to sit on the other side when people are picking you apart, when people are looking for the gotchas, when people are falling asleep, when people clearly haven't, when you have put your heart and your soul into those frigging decks and they haven't read it. Right? And they're making it up as they go. Or when they come into the meeting and their only point of view about the meeting is their point of view, right? They came from marketing. The only time they engage is when you're talking about marketing. They came from here. The only time they... So having the luxury of having sat on the other side of the seat and having the perspective every time I come into the board meeting that I've been there, I understand what it's like, is very helpful. The other thing that's very, very helpful for me is I'm a grandparent. I love being a grandparent. Being a grandparent means your job is to bring wisdom, not to parent. My job's not to parent. I did that already. My job in the company isn't to run the company. I did that already. My job is to bring wisdom. It's a great job. It's a great job, like being a grandparent. You come in 4 times, 5 times a year. You listen to what everybody is saying. You hopefully bring some wisdom to the conversation, and you leave. It's a great job, like being a grandparent. Great job. So that's sort of the way I think about it. One is think about it as if you're sitting on the other side of the table, and the second is think about why you're there. You're there to be a content expert. You're there to bring wisdom, and you're there, and I believe this very strongly, to continually go to events like this and to come in with different points of view. I believe, again, in my world, my opinion, that part of every CDNA would be what the board education was over the course of the year. Age is a number, right? I can still run for president, and I'm an old guy. You know, older guys have run for president. I could be on the Supreme Court, and I'm an old guy. So age is a number. But keeping yourself educated and smart by going to events like this should be part of what board membership is all about. You should have a list of how many events did you attend over the course of the year that made you relevant. If I were William McNabb, who ran $500 billion worth of investment, I'd want to know, do I have a group of directors who are smart, who are sharp, who are pushing themselves into situations that are uncomfortable or new for them, and are they bringing that wisdom to the conversation?
And on that note, I know you also have a practice of, at least for public companies, in your proxy statement or preparing for a company's proxy statement, that you'll advise companies to go out there and look at what hedge funds or equity investors may want to see so that you can proactively make disclosures that will address those interests. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I don't know where you are in your company journeys, but just looking at the upcoming topics here in this chapter, one of the ongoing conversations in businesses are private equity investors and hedge funds, and thinking about those folks coming into your business and how do you react and so forth. There's a very small basket of tools that they bring. They want to look at how you're spending your money. Are you doing a dividend? Are you doing a stock buyback? Do you have something that can be sold? They want to look at the quality of the management team. They want to look at the age of your board. It's a very small group of things. What we do on the boards that I've served on is every year, the Nominating and Gov Committee looks at that and go, how do we rate each other on this? Because if when somebody comes to your business and asks, you should have a justifiable reason for why you're doing what you're doing. And if you're not, if you have a justifiable reason for why you're not converting it to a dividend, if you have a justifiable reason for why you're not doing a stock buyback, or you have a big load of cash sitting on your balance sheet that you're not doing anything with because you have a strategy, you should be able to talk about that all the time. There should be a reason for it. It shouldn't be a shock. So taking their playbook and putting it up against you is I find to be a very, very helpful way to, when they come in, invite them in, have the meetings, talk to them, and tell them what you're thinking and your reasons are.
Perfect. Well, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, so I'm sure you guys have some questions, and we have microphones.
I was curious about when you did your turnaround at Zale and you developed your new strategy, what percentage of your employees did you find just jumped right on board with the new strategy, and how many did you decide couldn't be converted?
So the most important people, my view, as I said to you before, in the business are the people who serve the customer, the guest. One of the early things that we did was we changed some of the language. We had headquarters, that became the store support center. We had sales clerks, they became jewelry consultants. We had customers, they became guests. You treat guests different than you treat customers. A guest is somebody you invite in your home, which means you have to be prepared. Because we had an organization that had been through so much change, if you think about all of those CEOs, CFOs, everybody had a playbook, everybody had something that they were sending out to the organization. So there were binders and binders. I go in a stock room and there's a binder from every CEO about the right stuff to do. So the first thing we did was we threw out all the binders. The next thing that I did was I looked at all of our stores. Remember, this business was awful. It was awful. We were losing 22% comps. Hadn't made money in 2 years. It's 1,100 stores, so I looked at all the stores, and there were 100 stores that were doing well. So I visited all of those 100 stores, and I listened to them. And then I got in a psychologist who tested those people who were the store managers there, so that we could understand what the characteristics were that held those people together. And we did the same thing up the organization. What happened over the first 2 years was we eliminated 30% of the people who were in the senior stores jobs, 30% of the people who were in the jobs that reported to them, all the way down to the people who were in our stores. 30% of the people were changed out. And every time new people would come in, they would be tested against the competencies and attributes of what the successful people did. And if they didn't score in the 85th percentile, we wouldn't hire them. If they scored in the 85th percentile, what generally happened was that once they went into a store and once they became a district manager, a person who manages about 10 stores, they would increase the comp store performance by 3 or 4% within 60 days. Those people would. We could teach them the technical part of jewelry. What we couldn't teach them is leadership. What we couldn't teach them was that ownership. Tell the truth. Tell people where you're going. Tell them why you're going. And we are going, we're going on a journey. We're going to celebrate the converted. We're going to carry the wounded. And we're going to shoot the stragglers. I mean, and by the way, I mean, the reality is, even though it was a third out, 13,000 people who came to Zale every single day and who had been subjected to an unfortunate reign of leadership still had jobs at the end of that journey. Some people were sacrificed. I hope they all went to the competition and found work. But the other people, but it was a much better company. You know, after 2 years, we gave bonuses to every single person in the company who had never, ever had bonuses before. Ever. People cried. The level of ownership of people in that business. You went into any single Zale store, it's a little different today, but that person could tell you about their business. We would go out into the mall, sit down with the store manager, and they would review their business sheet. And they would go through every single line item and what they were going to do about it to make their business work. And over a period of time, you know, I'm leading from the back, which is the way it's supposed to be. The people who were in the front lines in front of the guests were the people who were leading the company, right? It's like invert the pyramid.
I know Ed over here has a burning question.
I'll be right back.
My question was really more on a macro sense. First of all, thank you, Theo, for sharing everything with us and so on. From a retail point of view, we see a lot of things happening. This, as you mentioned, Amazon, all the disruptor. We see Toys R Us filing bankruptcy, and we after what people did a buyout, right? And banning KKR, now take it down. But we see the same thing happening.
A lot of debt.
Bed Bath & Beyond going down. I mean, we see Macy's, we see Sears, we see, we're seeing, the real question I have is, what's your view of this retail and what's happening in retail in general? I mean, the malls are becoming vacant across America, the whole retail structure. It seems to me the genius you had was selling when you did, actually, on Zale, and maybe there's some truth to that. But these stores and the malls are all having, obviously, difficulty, and retail in general is having difficulty due to the disruption. In fact, Whole Foods was having some difficulty with other disruptors and so forth. What is your view? What's happening there?
Thank you for depressing me. Your name is Ed. That was really depressing. No, I believe this is the most exciting time in a very long time to be a merchant. A merchant, which is what existed in many stores, including department stores. I grew up in Macy's training program, all of that stuff. What a merchant does is they live with the customer. They understand who the customer is, what the customer is interested in, and they move with the customer. That's what merchants do. Again, I'll go back to it because it's an easy example that everybody's aware of. Jeff Bezos is a merchant. He is customer obsessed. The people who are customer obsessed are doing well. Lululemon, pretty good, right? They had the little see-through legging problem, but they bounced back. Pretty good, right? Customer obsessed. Going into the men's business, that's interesting. But Athleta, the brand that's part of Gap, who has embraced a much broader and is a much more accessible brand, is enormously successful. They're customer obsessed. There was a woman who wrote on a blog about Athleta, healthy bodies, educated minds, loving hearts. What a celebration of that brand. I mean, that's unbelievable. Those are great merchants who are doing that. Vineyard Vines, very tight, very clean. It's a wonderful time to be a person who starts with the customer, stays true to their vision, and evolves over time. I worked for 7.5 years at the Limited in Columbus, Ohio, for a guy named Leslie Wexner, one of the brilliant specialty merchants. And at the time, we had 14 brands. We had Abercrombie & Fitch, we had Victoria's Secret Stores, Bath & Body Works, New York & Company, Structure, Pantologons, Henry Bindles, Lane Bryant. And in that, there were a few brands. Abercrombie & Fitch, when Abercrombie & Fitch was Abercrombie & Fitch, was a brand that had merchants running it. They're no longer Abercrombie & Fitch. It's not customers' fault that they got less smart. Never know who's in the room. But they lost their way. They stopped listening to their customers. When Abercrombie & Fitch was really good, they designed their merchandise for kids who went to University of Virginia. 2 times a year they would go to the University of Virginia and they would go to the cool kids and pay them to go to their closet and look at what was in their closet. And they would adapt what was in their closets to their lines. It was that tight and that focused. In the merchandising business, there's an old adage, if narrow focus, broad appeal, broad focus, narrow appeal. They were really, really good. When Ralph Lauren was Ralph Lauren, he appealed to Westport, Connecticut, not Stamford, Connecticut, right? Not Norwalk, Connecticut. Very, very, very tight focus. And one of the neat things, I think, about some of these interesting businesses that are now going into stores, right? Stores don't work. Well, Bonobos must be stupid. Untuckit must be stupid because they're all opening stores. All the people who are starting online start with a clear, tight focus, but then they have to go into stores to prove proof of concept and to be visible. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but not unlike every other evolutionary time, the people who understand who they serve, their customers, their guests, will rise to the top. Can you imagine, at some point in time, this wonderful business, Zale, forgot that they were in the jewelry business and forgot they were in the celebration business. What a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful gift to be in the celebration business, to be invited into someone's celebration. And we started telling those stories. We identified people in the organization. I have 35 people's cell phones in my iPhone. 35 people, they sold $1 million worth of jewelry a year. I call them up regularly to ask them what they were doing, and to get ideas. So what happened at Zale, I got credit for. There was no genius. I listened to the people. I talked to customers. I was in stores every single weekend, listening to people and talking to them, and hearing unbelievable stories about what Zale meant to them. I went home to my little bitty town in Montgomery, West Virginia, and one of my friend's mothers, who'd been married for 50 years, I said, I work for Zale. And a tear came to her eye. And she looked at this small little ring that her husband had bought her when he got out of the Korean War, right? On time, layaway. But that ring was 50 years of marriage, 50 years of happiness and sadness, 50 years of watching her kids grow up. That ring symbolized something that was so great and so special. Shame on us for not realizing that. Shame on us. So shame on the people who are in the business of helping people look better, feel better, self-actualize with what we do, who don't realize the business that they're in. The people who forget that, they're working on the quarterly cycle. They're listening to the 28-year-olds who are their analysts, who are criticizing their business, and they're not making decisions based on strategy. They're making business based on somebody who graduated, just got out of graduate school. They're not talking to the customers. So there's going to be an enormous shakeout. But if I were interested in doing it again, I think this is one of the most important and interesting times ever to be a retailer. And there are people who are sneaking through. Now they're starting online, coming out. And then there's some people who are doing some reinvention who I think are kind of interesting and fun too. And I'm rooting for Macy's because I started there on the training program. I have enormous fondness for that business. Roland Hussey Macy, ex-sea captain, lots of stuff. Great history, great brand, great story. Yes?
One more.
So that's a great lead-in to the question I was going to ask, and I'll ask it. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
Please do.
So at the beginning of your discussion, you talked about the three principles that Mr. Zale, the founder, had. And the first one you enunciated was great products. And he was selling those to people that aspired to that great product, and it was a stretch for them to get that. Then you talked about, at the time that you came into Zales, it had become a commodity business in a downward spiral. And I presume that to mean that the products were lesser and the people they were selling it to had less of an aspiration than that first group. So I have two related questions. One is, at the beginning of your turnaround process, and then compared to the end of your turnaround process, was there a difference in the quality and types of products you were trying to sell and the types of people you were trying to sell those products to with the stories that you just very nicely described? So that's the first question. If you could answer that.
Okay. Can I answer that one first before you go on?
Yeah. Then I've got a real short one that ties right into that.
Okay. No, thank you. I think it's a great question. I think if no matter what your company is, no matter what you do, you have customers. And if you ever start selling down to your customers, you'll go out of business. You always have to sell up to their hopes, dreams, and their aspirations. You always have to do that. Our customers didn't change. We changed. Did our product change? You bet. Because we thought customers were stupid. We thought we could sell them stuff. A diamond that has lots of imperfections in them, we used to call them birth defects. But has lots of imperfections in it, and really a lot of imperfections, they used to call it frozen spit. They were selling frozen spit, and they were selling it to somebody hoping that somebody would buy that. They were selling down to the customer. You never sell down to the customer. You always aspire to people's hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Every single day, every single one of us, whether you have a $25,000 a year salary or a $25 million a year salary, are making discretionary choices for the things that you want in your life. And you're saving for them, and you're holding on to them. You're not putting them on layaway like my friend Ross Cottrell did back in West Virginia back in the day. But people are buying things that are a little bit maybe beyond, because they're buying up. When you buy down, it's a whole different feeling walking down the mall with a beautiful package. We were selling our diamonds in a plastic bag. And I'm thinking, wait, I can use these to pick up poop with my dog, but I'm not going to give them to my customers. We're going to put real nice bags. We're going to put our diamonds in beautiful boxes, and we're going to bring the quality up. I don't think our customers changed at all. Did it take them longer to make the payment on the diamond ring? Yes. But did they? But I got to tell you, it is the most chilling time in a young man's life to put that diamond there and to look for when you're in love and to pray that she likes it. So you're not going to sprint down the hall with the Kmart package. You are going to make discretionary choices in your life. You are going to elevate her and what you do. Customers don't get stupid. Retailers get stupid. People who are in businesses who think customers get stupid. Those businesses go out of business. So yes, we changed our products over time. They got better as we started making money. We went from $118 million negative EBITDA to $90 million positive. So we swung it by over $200 million in 4 years. We took the stock from $1.39 to $21. And over time, as we afforded it, we got better and better goods. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful diamonds that I would sell and stand behind with anyone. So we got the diamonds that our customers deserved.
So here's the related question. Diamonds are products, your customers are buyers. Your stock is a product, institutional investors are the buyers.
Yes.
When you were at $1.50, give or take, you no doubt had one mix and one profile of an institutional investor.
Yes.
When you got the company up to the kind of EBITDAs you're talking about, and the stock price got up to $21, did you find you had a different mix and a different profile of institutional investors at that point?
Yeah. So one of the things that you may know is that there are, for investors, there are certain triggers. And so some investors can invest in you when you are essentially a high-risk junk bond kind of company. As your company performs, other investors can invest in you. You meet their investment hurdles. All of the investors have investment hurdles. So the shorts, right? The people who are betting on you to go from $1.39 to $1.38 or something, I don't know, doesn't get much lower than that. But the people who are betting on you to go down start to move out of your stock. As you start hitting investment hurdles, the quality of your investors goes up, the conversation goes up. You know, for 2 years, I read articles in the Wall Street Journal, the Dallas Morning News, every retail trade article about our demise and our death. I kept every single one of those articles in my desk. Every single one. And every day when we would start feeling great about what we've done, I'd pull those articles out. And I'd look at those articles. It's like, We're always going to be humble, and we're always going to be hungry. But we have to be humble. No matter what you do, you have to be humble. So, yeah, the quality of investor changes as you do better. You know, it's like banks. Banks don't lend you money when you need money. They'll give it to you when you have money. Investors don't invest in you when you're not a great company. But when you're starting to roll, I mean, they're very much willing to put their money in you. So, yes.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Question
And
about...
you're a newbie.
I'm a newbie. How did you
Will you
tell?
come back again?
I'll come back, definitely. When you have turnaround, it's like sleeping in the snow with 4 feet blanket. You have to decide what body part you cover and which one you sacrifice. You explained where you put your priority. Did you have to sacrifice anything, and if so, what was it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think professionally, there was, we took $150 million of expenses out of the business. We closed 400 stores. Those people, all of it wasn't just people, but the people who lost their jobs, in many cases didn't do anything wrong. They just worked for people who did stuff wrong. So that was very difficult, and that's a really difficult sacrifice. And the only way I think you can, at least I can, think about justifying those kind of sacrifices are the sacrifices you're making for the greater good? I think the answer to that was yes. And are you being fair to the people as they leave the door? Are you treating them the way you'd like to be treated? And are you giving them enough of a time frame and a cushion so they can think about transitioning? So that was a sacrifice. And the other sacrifice, quite honestly, was personal sacrifice. I was working from 6 a.m. in the morning to 8 o'clock, and my wife was living in Chicago. I was living in Dallas. I'd fly home on the weekends. On Friday night, I'd fly to Chicago. Sunday night, I'd fly back to Dallas because I wanted to be the first person at work on Monday morning, because they'd seen so many people come and go. I didn't want them to think that I wasn't in it with them. When I came into the building, all of the people who had big titles and big dollars parked next to the building, right? It's Dallas. It's hot. It hails. So we changed it all. We made it based on service. People who were here the longest deserve to sit up front. So we sat way down in the basement, and we came from there. It's a little thing, but it's symbolism along the way. So I made huge personal sacrifices, and I'm not saying that for you guys certainly to feel sorry for me, but I was 28 pounds heavier than I am today. My blood pressure was 40 pounds higher. I don't think it was a sustainable lifestyle over a long period of time. I ate badly. I had too many drinks. I mean, all that stuff I did, it was awful. It was awful. So I think personally, very physically demanding to do that kind of job, which is why I'd never do it again. And professionally, if you ever feel good, I made a joke before a little bit about having to let people go, but if you ever feel good about that, then you aren't putting yourself in that person's shoes. One of the first lessons I ever learned as a young executive, a woman who was one of my mentors and one of my heroes, who's moved on now, and I was in a junior job in Macy's Herald Square in personnel, and I fired a guy, and I had all of the documentation and all the paperwork and all that stuff, and Gigi called me up to her office. Gigi Michelson, unbelievable person. And I sat on the edge of the couch and I said, Gigi, what do you want? She said, well, why did you fire him? I said, Gigi, these are the things that he did. And I brought up the folder and all the work. I mean, this thing was documented. She said, but you called him into your office and you fired him. He's been working here for 10 years. He didn't have time to think about what he was going to tell his family. He didn't have time to mentally prepare himself to go home, because this has been the place where he spent most of his waking hours for the last 10 years, and you took it away from him. I'm not saying what you did was wrong. What I'm saying is the way you did it. It's like, that was a long time ago, but that lesson is a lesson I never forgot. So, I don't think you can ever be cavalier about those kind of sacrifices. It wasn't their fault that they weren't the right people for the jobs. It was somebody else's fault who put them there, and I owned it, and I had to make those decisions. So those are the kinds of sacrifices that you make. And for 2 years we didn't give a raise. We didn't give people raises. I didn't take a raise. Nobody took a raise. And it was the right thing to do. And other than the people that we let go, we lost nobody. Because you capture people through their hearts and their minds, you don't capture them through their wallets. And if they feel like they're on a journey that they can believe in, they'll stay with you.
Horgan's was part of Zales, wasn't it?
Say it again? Oh, yes, sir, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, when I
Oh,
was
God, is this a customer complaint?
it's a story.
Okay.
When I was in high school, my father died. And so we lived in the Houston area. And so my mother would go to Corrigan's all the time to buy jewelry. And her comment was, it's better than therapy.
Isn't it great?
But the thing is that the original stores had jewelers who were mostly very trustworthy Jewish jewelers. And they had a book. They had a big book.
Lashana Tova. It's Rosh Hashanah today.
Yes,
So
and so they could, if they, they'd call the customers. They knew who had money in River Oaks, in Houston, and so they'd come. They'd have you come in and things like that. Then your timeline's fine because somewhere in the 80s it changed.
Yes.
And then my family moved and never went back, but they moved to Tiffany and Company. And they never went back to Zales or Corrigan's or Bailey Banks.
Yes.
So that's sort of, I understand what you're talking about from that point of view of the company.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The main people like Mr. Klastron, he retired. They all retired. I guess they originally were hired by Mr. Zale.
Yep. Yeah. Our aspiration was to be your local jeweler with international buying power. That was what we hoped to do. We didn't get there in the 4 years that I was the CEO, but what I believe is Cindy Graham in Oklahoma City. I can name these people who have the relationships that you're talking about, and we started to get more and more of those people over a period of time who had those relationships. Cindy Graham, one of my favorite jewelry consultants, there was a man who was a mall walker, and every single day she would see him, bib overalls, Oklahoma City, he's walking around the mall. And one day she approached him and said, you never come in the store. You always say hello, you're a nice man, you never come in the store. And he said, it's funny that you should say that. I was just thinking about buying my wife a wedding ring. So you never know who that, right? I was just thinking about it. We've been married for 50 years. Our 50-year anniversary is coming up. I never bought her a wedding ring. He said, will you help me buy her a wedding ring? She said, sure, of course. So she showed him some rings. He went home. He came back with a shoebox full of money. Shoebox full of money. And bought the ring. And Cindy said, are you going to be here when we give her the ring? He said, no, I'm going to hide across the mall because I want to see the look on her face. You can't make that stuff up. I mean, if you forget that that's why you're there, we had a man in Toronto who had lost his wife and remembered his high school sweetheart from 30 years ago. And now with electronic media and Facebook and all this other stuff, he found this woman from 30 years ago. He lost his wife with breast cancer. His high school sweetheart was a breast cancer survivor. They started dating. He proposed to her at a People's store. in Toronto Eaton Center? She said yes. The store was in tears. They were in tears. They invited the store to their wedding. How can you be in the price business when you have those kind of people who are there every single day on these individual journeys? So if you think about, to the question of retail before, if you think about what you're doing is saving money, saving $1 here or $1 there, and you've lost sight of the business that you're in, no matter what business that you're in, the reason why you got into business when that business was in the entrepreneurial stage, the reason why I went back and researched M.B. Zale, Morris B. Zale, Russian Jewish immigrant, was I wanted to know what it felt like when he was in the entrepreneurial stage, and whether or not any of that stuff could be pulled forward and made relevant for 2010. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of it could be pulled forward. And we talked about him, and we talked about the history of the business so that people would be proud again about where they came from and hopefully attached to what we were doing and where we were going. Yes?
Mr. Killion, you've given us
Theo,
Theo,
please, God.
you have given us a lot to think about, and you've given us a lot of very, very excellent advice. So would you summarize for us, the 2 or 3 things that we should be doing as board members? For example, I chair an audit committee on a $10 billion a year company.
Yep.
And participate also in a very large company locally that does healthcare and another one that does commercial products. As a board member, and there are a number of challenges, and you certainly painted them, they're very, very customer-centric. But in terms of just board dynamics, where do you think we should be focusing our energy over the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah. I think it starts with strategy. I really do. I hope each of you who are on boards are members of companies that have a robust strategy, development, planning, and execution process. I believe that that's really the time when boards and management goes at it, and you're going at it in support of the business. It's not a personal thing. It's all the wisdom that you brought around the boardroom, all the knowledge that's in the company, and this thing called strategy, so that when it's put to bed, your meetings are very, very efficient because they're about checking off against the strategy that you agreed to. So I think again, my opinion, we started off with opinion based on some facts and lots of experience over time, is the strategy work is the most important work that a board can do, the absolute most important work, and that you don't sacrifice the time, you don't factor out, you don't have those people in the boardroom who are leaving early and all that stuff. You give it the right amount of time so it can breathe, and if people are struggling, walk away from it, and the best thing you can do is think about it. Because if it's struggling and you have smart people in the room and they're struggling, then you got to think about it. You have to go away and let it marinate overnight. And then you come back and you have the conversation again. I think, again, my opinion, I think the most important thing in the world is strategy. The most important thing in support of that strategy is who are the customers that you serve, and are we serving them in the highest and best possible way that we can. And hopefully having a group of people who are sitting around those board tables with you who are equally engaged in the business of being a board member, not the business of wanting to be management, but the business of really helping to advise strategy, advice, counsel, so the business can be better. So strategy for boards, I think, is really important. Being honest about whether or not the board has the capabilities to be able to execute against that strategy as the business changes and evolves. Having people on the board who say, you know what, I was great for the board here, the board's evolved, it's different, and being able to tell people the truth about where the board is so that people are there. I think that, again, for board, it's important to, for you to be here. So good for you to be here. And just to hear other points of view. If you walk out with a nugget, it's a good use of time. because you don't get to do that very often, to sit in a room and think and say, you know what, yeah, he didn't know everything. He knew a couple things that are actually kind of interesting. I'll think about it. So yeah, I mean, I think those would be the couple of things. Uh-oh, we're getting a heave-ho here.
I think we're actually out of time, but Theo, thank you so much. Your story was really amazing. Your guidance was very inspirational. Thank you.